Welcome. Hi, I'm Dan Matway. Thank you very much for visiting the website. I hope you're finding some useful information in the various rooms. And now you're in the estate planning room. And this is a really important conversation I'm going to have today. So I'm really grateful to have Mr. Frank Valeriote with us, a lawyer here in Guelph, former MP of Guelph, very well respected, known in the community. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
And Frank, in my role as an advisor, and as you're aware, my specialty is dealing with families affected by disability. I have a brother and sister with schizophrenia. I understand the implications when my mom's gone and things of that nature. So I'm fine with the RDSP, the investment, the insurance side of things. I talk to them about things like estate planning, how important it is, Henson Trust, discretionary trust. These are all terms people have heard and they're aware of. And I offer some guiding principles, but I said, you need to talk to a lawyer who really understands these things. It's very, very important. So I'd love to just talk a little bit about that and how it's going to affect parents and families. And they can get a bit of an understanding of, what should I do to secure the future of my child when I'm gone. So when we talk about a Henson Trust, for example, maybe just speak a little bit to why that's pertinent or helpful to somebody who has a child with a disability.
Well, a lot of people who come in to see me have concerns that their child with a disability may lose their right to the ODSP, the disability pension through the Ontario government, because they'll suddenly leave them with assets when they die. And it's quite clear that the Henson Trust that you referred to, or the absolute discretionary trust, is a vehicle or a model that is used to avoid the loss of entitlement to the ODSP. So a Henson Trust or an absolute discretionary trust is a trust in which the deceased assets, and actually you don't have to be deceased to create an absolute discretionary trust.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's often a question.
There's a way of setting up a trust while you're alive, and it's called an inter vivos trust, but typically it's associated with a will. And so when somebody dies, the assets, so much of the assets that you wish to go into this trust can go into this absolute discretionary trust, and the trustee has the absolute discretion to use the assets in that trust. I was about to say money, because it doesn't have to always be money. They have the discretion to use the assets in that trust for the disabled person, which means in any given year they could choose not to use any of it. In order for it to be a flawless Henson Trust, one that can't be challenged by a beneficiary, it has to be absolute discretionary, which means they can choose not to give anything in any particular year. But because of the nature of that trust, the absolute discretion, the courts in 1989 recognized, in fact, Mr. Henson came from Guelph, Leonard Henson. The courts have decided that because of the absolute discretionary nature of that trust, it does not disentitle a disabled child or any person disabled to access to the ODSP. And what's interesting is that people automatically associate disability with a person who is entitled to ODSP. There are other forms of disability for which we have used a Henson Trust. Somebody has been alcohol or drug addicted, and a parent fears that if they leave the money to their child, it will be gone. You know, that feeling that it'll just all be spent on alcohol or drugs. So I've had people set up absolute discretionary trusts, Henson Trusts, to provide for that person who suffers from another form of disability. So that they're looked after. And the interesting thing, Dan, is that if it's drafted properly, they can't be challenged. I've had people who were beneficiaries of these kinds of trusts come in to see me. I didn't know why they were coming in to see me, and they said, my parent died and I'm entitled to something, and I'm not seeing what I want to see. I get, so much per month, and that's it, and I need more. And so my antennae go up. I ask them who the trustee is, if I can get in touch with them or their lawyer, and sure enough, 9 times out of 10, these are Henson Trusts that have been created, absolute discretionary trusts, and they're not entitled to step forward and say, I want more.
Okay. Great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, actually. When you talk about absolute discretion, you talk about a beneficiary wondering, why isn't the money coming in? That trustee has an awful lot of power. So that's an important aspect of this. And I always encourage anybody at seminars and whatnot, when they're talking to their lawyer setting this up, have a conversation about who that trustee is going to be. So speak a little bit to that.
Well,
what should they consider?
Well, you're so right, Dan. The choice of the trustee is so important because you need to confide in that trustee and do a little advanced care planning and give the trustee an idea of what your expectations are for the well-being of the person who's ultimately entitled to, or ultimately would be the beneficiary, not entitled, but the beneficiary of some of the trust assets. It may be a house that's in the trust, and you might say, look, keep them in the house for as long as you can. Of course, there are limits on the amount of spending that, or the amount of income that ODSP recipient can receive. The regulations set out a whole list of things that you can receive without affecting your ODSP.
Something else the trustee should have a very good understanding of.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
and talk to an accountant or their MPP's office if they need to, if they want to better understand the regulation. But holding a house in the trust is absolutely within the power of the law and the trustee. But you should let the trustee know what your expectations are. That you don't want to give the person so much money, the beneficiary so much money that they'll disqualify themselves from ODSP. And if it's not an ODSP case, not give them so much that they'll squander everything that they give them. And if it's not an ODSP case, you might say to the beneficiary, I'll pay the rent. I'll pay you so much a month for food. I'll pay you so much, for entertainment if that's the case. And let them know that they should sit with that beneficiary from time to time and satisfy them as to the amount that's being given, why it's being given, and what the parent or the deceased had expected of the trustee. And when you mention it, when you're talking about a trustee, you've got to be careful not to put too much pressure on that trustee, because if it's a sibling of the beneficiary of that trust, you can imagine that the sibling relationship is going to deteriorate very quickly because one sibling is having to go to another sibling and saying, may I have something here? So you need to choose somebody who, I suppose the word has some strength, some backbone, some resilience to withstand that kind of pressure, because a lot of pressure is sometimes put on the trustee of an absolute discretionary trust.
I'll tell you what happened in my situation with my mom. Like my mother, like a lot of parents do, if they have a child with a disability, will assume that the one without the disability, I'll name them the trustee.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't even know the fact until that parent may be gone.
Right.
But so I knew I was the trustee. One day I was going to visit my mom in Oakville, and my brother had been duct taped and tied to a pole by a bunch of teenagers.
Yeah.
So this was 6 years ago. My brother, we went to high school at St. Mike's in Toronto. His last year of junior hockey, he was the Eastern Conference first center all-star. The second center all-star, went on to gain notoriety wearing number 99. So he was a pretty good hockey player, muscular, athletic, 190 pounds. Today he's 140 pounds of just frail and vulnerable. I was livid. I wanted to kill somebody, to do this to him. And he said, there's a bunch of teenagers, they don't know what they're doing. And I probably learned more about forgiveness talking to them that day than I've learned from anybody.
Yeah.
But what happened is the next day I said to my mom, you've got to change your will. What do you mean you've got to? We went to all this trouble to get everything in place. I said, when you die, I don't want to be the guy giving my brother and sister money.
I get it.
I just want to be a brother.
I get it.
So that for us, so she changed it. So in our case, it was a corporate trustee.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for everybody.
No.
But I think the point is, have those discussions with your parents, with the families,
Absolutely.
with the kids.
Yeah.
And I take it that's the type of conversation you want to draw out when
Advanced
you come and talk
planning.
about this.
You've got to let them know well in advance, the trustee, let them know well in advance what your expectations are. And frankly, it's not uncommon to even let the beneficiary know that you're having these conversations so that they don't have any undue expectations when you die that suddenly they're going to come into this money. But interestingly as well, and this is more of a legal point, there has to be a residual beneficiary. That means that the discretionary trust, when created, has got to say what happens to those assets in that trust upon the death of the beneficiary of that trust.
Right.
Because if you don't name a beneficiary after the fact, or residual beneficiary after the death of the original beneficiary, then it's implied that everything was truly meant for that original beneficiary,
And
that disabled person, and that will give them cause to set the trust aside
sure.
in law and in court, and you don't want that to happen. So you've got to be pretty precise and immaculate really in drafting it.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And you've mentioned that the trust, most people will come to me and assuming that everything gets liquidated at death. So you've talked a little bit about, I'll have parents who say, I want to buy my child a house before I'm gone, without understanding the implications of them now having title to a house, possible predatory relationships, just being irresponsible with managing it.
Yep.
So these things, a lot of these things can be solved within the trust itself.
They can be, the trust itself is, very strictly worded. It's been developed over time, and typically lawyers don't veer off any of the wording, because there's wording that's tested and true, and you stick to that wording. But the nuances associated with it are those that arise from your conversation in advance of your death with the trustee.
Right.
So while the trust says you have the absolute discretion to give something or give nothing at all, really, this is what I'd like you to do. And remind them that they have to keep in the confines of the regulations if it's an ODSP recipient, and whatever else you might want to associate with the planned giving through that trust if it's a non-ODSP recipient.
No, that's extremely helpful, because with ODSP, Registered Disability Savings Plans, $100,000 in a segregated fund, there are various strategies and ways to protect ODSP and provincial benefits,
Yes.
but that conversation about the actual trustee, the assets, where they're going to flow, and really taking care of their future, it's such an important one to have. And I think a lot of poor planning is done just because people don't understand.
Exactly.
So this is just tremendously helpful, and I think just giving people some insight into, here's some things we should be thinking about.
And just to add to that, it's not just the lawyer you have to talk to, it's the financial planner who knows about the RDS.
Yes.
No, truly, the RDS
Absolutely.
piece, because there's a lot of nuances associated with the RDSP, and how much you could put in, and when you could put it in, the maximum amounts, so that again you don't disqualify yourself to ODSP. But again, that's more an association with the ODSP recipient than anything. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for doing this, and
You're very welcome.
it's great to have you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.